From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett, and today I'm going to show you how to winterize roses. We're going to mulch our strawberry bed. We're going to mulch some of the perennials in our nursery bed. And then we're going in the greenhouse, and we're going to hand pollinate a greenhouse cucumber. Before I talk to you about how to winterize roses, I should make mention of the fact that I realize that many of you looking at this program are in a part of the country where you won't need to winterize them. I know my daughter in California has roses in blossom. My sister does in Houston. That's true with much of the Gulf Coast. But if you live in the northern part of the country, you are apt to lose your roses due to the winter cold unless you winterize them. And let's look at this particular plant that I have here, a variety called Peace. The leaves still look reasonably green on it, but the plant itself has been subjected to a number of days of sub-freezing weather. I want to point out that if right down here at the base of the ground, just beneath the ground, is the most tender part of the rose bush. This is where the named variety, which happens to be Peace, a large pink variety, soft pink, is budded onto the root of a very vigorous growing variety to give the strength for this plant to grow. Now, at that particular point, that's the weak link in the rose bush. What I'm going to do is to cover up this piece with soil. Now, I'm going to take off a couple of dead stalks I see in there, but then we'll be ready to cover this. Now, you might think, I could take soil here from the edges of the ground and pull it up around this bush, but if I did, I'd expose the rose's roots to cold. So what I am doing is bringing in soil from another part of the garden, just ordinary soil, and I'm going to mulch. I'm going to make a cone, you might say, of soil around that plant. Now, I don't really care if this plant winter kills back to the soil line, because if you remember when I planted it last spring, I cut it at that time back to where it was less than a foot from the ground. Now, that rose is all set for winter, and I can even cut off some of these tall stems up here, because this is only going to whip in the wind all winter long. Now, I'm not really, I should say, back up a little bit and say last fall, a month ago, I said don't prune your roses back for the winter because you would cause them to send out new growth. Well, we're past the growing season now, and we don't have to worry. We can take off these old dead stalks. And now this rose is ready. Next spring we'll uncover it. Now the next thing I want to do is talk about strawberries. And this right in here is a strawberry bed of June-bearing varieties, which I planted out last April. At that time, I set the plants, a single plant every 2 feet. And you can see the massive group of plants that we have in here now. This is known as the matted row system, and will produce a marvelous crop next spring. What I'm worried about in the wintertime in the north is not the cold, but the fact that we get days in the spring when the sun comes out and thaws the surface and the plants rise a little bit, and then they freeze and they dry out. It's called heaving. If I could keep these plants evenly cold all winter, I'd be in the best shape. What I'm going to use is pine needles. Now, if you can't get pine needles, you can get straw is very good. Marsh hay is excellent. You just cover these plants over about 3 or 4 inches deep with these pine needles, and there they will rest until next spring. When spring comes, I'll rake off a lot of those needles, but some will have filtered down around the plants. When the blossoms and fruit come, the fruit will lie right on top of those pine needles and be just as clean as can be. Perfect fruit. Next June is when this one bed about 14 feet long will produce many, many quarts of luscious strawberries. Now let's talk about a couple of root crops. I have the winter radishes, and we have some rutabagas. Well, let's start first of all with the winter radishes. Not very beautiful to look at this time of the year. These were planted about the middle of July. And I want to show you first of all what we're talking about. Here, this is a perfect example of the root of a winter radish, a type called the Chinese white. Now this is an enormous looking radish, very tender. This will keep for months and months in the winter time, mild flavored. Simply take the tops off and you can store a root such as this in your sand, or damp sand, or sawdust, or peat moss, any place where you can keep it around 45 to 50 degrees. We have a lot of these in here. You can see that the pretty good sized roots coming out. Certainly make the ordinary radish look like a baby. This is the winter radish, one called the white Chinese. We also have, or have had in other years, one called black Spanish, a round one with a black skin but white flesh inside. Now we'll go down the road to where I planted some winter turnips, so-called, or rutabagas, sometimes called swedes. Now I didn't plant these as early as I would like to have this year. Would like to have got them in about the 1st of July. They went in about the middle of the month, but I'll just try a couple of them and see what they look like here. Not very large, but seem to be in pretty good condition. Now I have a little trick on keeping these over. You cut off the tops, of course, and the roots so that you end up with just the root like this. These have a habit of dehydrating very quickly. So if you will heat up some water and put some paraffin wax on the top until the paraffin melts, then, having cut off the top and the root, just dip your turnip in and out again, and it will be coated with a thin coating of paraffin wax. And that will keep it from dehydrating. Put it in a cool place, and you can use it any time during the winter. Now we're going over here to where I have some perennials in a nursery bed. You might see right here, for example, that we still have excuse me, pansies in blossom. This is the type of thing, these will be blossoming early next spring as well. In this part of the bed, I have some English daisies, still showing a few flowers, but pretty well frosted. This will blossom in pink and white next spring. In front of it is the Canterbury bell. Now, it's a biennial with pink, blue, or white bell-shaped flowers, blossom in June. Down beyond it, we have some Sweet William. Very handsome plants of Sweet William. Again, a biennial. You notice that some are dark in color, sort of reddish. Others are pale green. I know from past experience that the dark foliage ones will have dark red flowers, excuse me, probably maroon. The lighter ones will be pink or white. Then across on this other side of the plank here, I have foxglove, a rather tricky plant to keep through the winter. If you can keep that crown from freezing and thawing, you'd be in pretty good shape. Now I'm going to use here some more pine needles, just about the nicest kind of mulch that I could imagine. Just pine needles on top of them like that. Spread those out. And these plants we won't see these again until next spring, but when we do, they will be alive and ready to transplant into our perennial garden for blossoming next spring and summer. Another root crop we want to get to today is some carrots. And I have two ideas on growing carrots and beets or taking care of them in the wintertime. One, you can dig them right now, and if you do, you're apt to get some pretty nice carrots. Something like that is so tender at this time of year. This seems to be a fairly large carrot, but don't let the size fool you. At this time of year, when we have cool weather, This is just as tender as can be. Put these in your crisper. And if you do, I have another trick for you. To keep them from sprouting, cut off that tip right up here so that you take the top off. Let that dry a little bit, and that plant can't sprout. That root can't sprout, and it will keep for you most of the winter. Otherwise, you can cover the row over with leaves and go out here anytime in the winter and dig them. You find they're so tender because the cool weather just brings out this sweet flavor. Now let's go in the greenhouse. First thing we're going to do is that cucumber. Now I've said that we could grow cucumbers very easily in the house if you have a nice picture window. We have a greenhouse, which is a little bit special. Oh, I see a bird has just moved into the greenhouse, trying to find his way out at this point. These are 2 cucumber plants, which we started about 2.5 months ago from seeds. Last week, we hand-pollinated one of the blossoms. And here's a cucumber now, about 3.5 inches long. Right at the end of it is the old flower, just there it is, just came off in my fingers. Now that cucumber will double in size. By next week it'll be twice that size. Now, cucumbers have male and female flowers, and the very easy way to tell is this. At the base of the female flower is a little cucumber. And you can see it, there's a little pickle right there at the base. Now the male flower does not have that swelling at the base. There's one over here. Take this one off. You see, you have at the base of the male flower just a straight stem, whereas the female one has the cucumber on the bottom. What I want to do is to take off the petals like that, so we can get to the pollen. And all that you have to do then is to reach down to the center of the flower and touch it like that. And very soon this will turn into a cucumber, which will be absolutely delicious, and cut 2 or 3 weeks we will be ready to pick it. Now, I'm happy today to be able to show you one of our Amaryllis, an absolutely beautiful plant, and point out to you that this lovely thing is the same bulb which we had a year ago, kept through the summertime, kept the plant fed out in the sunshine. It developed these enormous dark green strap-shaped leaves. They died down in October and we cut them off. And about the same time that we cut them off, we bought some more bulbs and potted them up. And this one, you see, has come up without any leaves this time, which is rather surprising, but it shouldn't be, because Amaryllis may send leaves with their blossoms or may not. We have 4 flowers on that cluster. We have another cluster coming up here. Now that shows you that they will live through from year to year. Now we started, as I say, this one at the same time as this, just now beginning its first flower stem. They are so unpredictable, but they are so lovely, and they will last for many, many years. You don't have to worry about the expense of an Amaryllis, because if you think of it in the terms of many years, then you certainly have a great investment. There is a good deal of interest nowadays in growing herbs, both outdoors and indoors, and I wanted to just show you a few samples of what you can grow indoors on a windowsill. Here is dill. Start it from seeds. Give it sunny windowsill. Keep the soil moist, good rich soil. You know, if you never bothered to cut any of this to use in the kitchen, can you imagine a foliage plant which is any prettier than dill? Blue-green, just as soft and filmy as possible. Next to it, a big clump of parsley. Now this is one which grew all summer in our garden. We dug it a few weeks ago and put it in a flower pot. You can pick these parsley leaves all winter long. A good sunny windowsill. Again, keep the soil moist. Just last week we dug up a clump of chives and cut it back right to within 1 inch of the soil. This is 1 week's growth. Imagine how tender and succulent those stems are. I can see some baked potatoes with some sour cream and chives like that to go with it. Next we have thyme, the real old-fashioned mother of thyme. Not the mother of thyme, the English thyme. This is the one which is a bushy type of thing, exceedingly fragrant, will grow all winter long, providing it has temperatures above 50 degrees. Oh, we have 2 or 3 others. Here's basil. This particular one was grown from a cutting. We could have grown it from seed, and you can do the same thing. I noticed that this one is trying to make some flowers, and I don't want it to make blossoms, so reach in and pick those blossoms right out of the tip, and that will cause it to branch sideways, and we'll continue to get the lovely foliage, and so fragrant. And way down in front here, I have a plant of rosemary. Now, rosemary is the herb that's for remembrance, delightful fragrance. This is a Mediterranean herb. Allow the soil to get dry between deep waterings. Give it full sunshine. Pick any of these leaves off whenever you want them to use in the kitchen. Now, way down in the front, I have a plant which is not an herb. This is a plant known as the sensitive plant, a fun type of plant for children called Mimosa pudica, or sensitive plant. When you touch the leaves like this, you see what happens? They'll curl right up for you. See that one curling right up? Get my hands over here. Usually they curl up in front of your eyes. They're a very unusual plant. It's rather cold in this greenhouse today, not curling as fast as they will if the temperature's a little bit warm. Sensitive plant, give it sunshine and a moist soil, and you'd enjoy it in the house. Now let's have a little progress report. First of all, I'm going to show you a fern, which doesn't look very large at this time. This is a fern, which a couple of months ago you saw me struggling with here in the greenhouse. It was as large as this big one in the back, but it had exhausted the soil, and there was just a little rim of live plants on the edge. And I hacked my way through it. It seemed like as though I were cutting through wire. But here we have a young plant started, a dozen or more good young fronds coming. In about 6 months' time, it'll be just as nice as this plant up here. This is a type of Boston fern, makes a good house plant. Well, a while ago, someone brought in a couple of cuttings I'd like to show you. First of all, this is of a trailing ivy geranium with pale flowers. Usually, you see these in a deep pink, an excellent variety. This one, grown from a cutting, now has 2 or 3 good strong stems. I would take a plant such as this and cut off the tips and root them. By spring, I could have at least a dozen of this nice variety. Then here we have a plant called Hypericum, or St. John's wort. 5 months ago, there was a 1-inch stem with a single leaf. And from it, look at the size of this plant. This has bright yellow flowers, will live outdoors all throughout the year, will blossom most of the summer. These bright yellow flowers, a lovely plant. Speaking of something else from a cutting, here's a Chinese hibiscus. Very familiar plant to you all who live in the southern part of the country. A 3.5-inch cutting, rooted. Already this precocious little thing is trying to blossom. 2 flower buds coming on it. If I let those blossoms open, each flower would be larger than the plant itself. Well, now let's go on to our plant clinic, and I have here today a very interesting plant known as a bird of paradise. But before I show you the plant, I want to talk to you about the blossom. One of the most exotic blossoms known in the plant kingdom. This plant comes from South Africa. Its botanical name is Strelitzia. It was named for Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, who was the wife of King George III. Very lovely flower, which lasts a long time. But let me show you the plant that was brought into me. These plants grow about 4 feet tall eventually. But the person that brought this plant into me said, I have some problems. I can see some little specks here on the stem where I can find one of them. Here we are, right here. And this is scale. This is a very dreaded insect because this insect sucks the juices out of the plant. There are a few here, not very many on this plant. I'm glad it was brought to me at this time, because what I would use if this were my plant is just a stiff toothbrush and warm soapy water, and I would wash them off. If it were severe infestation, I'd have to use something like malathion. I'd rather use soap and water if I can. You can see that this plant is a little bit high in the pot and very wobbly. It should be lower. I think it's in too large a pot. I have a feeling, though no one told me so, that it was repotted recently. And let's just knock it out of the pot and take a look at it, because it doesn't look all that too happy to me. Now, see, the roots aren't working in the soil. All of this excess soil here. It's much too much. Let's see, I'll get rid of some of this junk soil for a minute here. Now, this kind of a plant likes the soil that's really rich, a lot of nutrients in it. And let's see what that flower pot would be like. Well, I think we'll take it one size larger. There we go. This flower pot ought to be just about right for this plant. Now, I've mixed a lot of compost into here. And we're going to, with compost and ordinary potting soil, I'm going to sprinkle in, as I put it in, a little of a long-lasting fertilizer. This one happens to be called Osmocote. We'll jam the soil down in here deeply. And let me tell you about the culture. Wants bright sunshine. From October to March, the soil should be kept just somewhat on the dry side. And from March through September, keep the soil moist and feed this plant about once a month. Now, someone has said, I'd like to grow one of these from seeds. And my word to you is, be prepared to wait for a long time, because it will take at least 7 or 8 years before it's big enough to blossom. Now, I have today another plant I want you to see, an excellent house plant called the piggyback plant. And you can see how it gets its name. Here, on each of the leaves, is another little plant growing as a piggyback. Now, if we cut this leaf off like this, snap it off, you see underneath here some little brown spots. That's where some roots will form. We'll take something like this over. I have a pot of soil here somewhere. We'll just poke a hole here in the soil. Stick this thing right on down to the soil level, like that. Give that plant a drink of water, and we'll have a new piggyback plant started. Now, sometimes this plant is called Mother of Thousands. Pretty good name for it. There are just dozens and dozens of young plants started from this. A rather unique way of propagating itself. Handsome plant which likes in the house, not full sun, but a good deal of bright reflected light. Keep the soil moist. Feed it with any houseplant fertilizer about once a month. A plant that you're going to like, and you can grow very easily. It's a plant that you can share with your friends, because every one of those leaves will make a new plant. Now, let's see if we can get to a few questions today. First one is from Massachusetts. My asparagus bed is 15 years old, and I feel it has run out. The asparagus is now spindly and thin. Can you tell me how to bring it back to full production? Well, right this fall, I try to get some cow manure or horse manure. It could be fresh. Put it on about 3 inches deep on top of the bed. Next spring, the very first thing in the spring, dig it into the top 2 or 3 inches of the ground and leave it right there. I think your plants need to be fed and fed well. Also, every other month during the summer, put some 10-10-10 fertilizer on the bed and scratch it in. I think in 2 years' time, you'll have a good asparagus bed again. This is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I have good success making cuttings, except for geraniums. I lose about 50% of them through root rot. I've used coarse sand, garden soil, vermiculite, and a mixture of all three. Can you help? Well, I think your trouble probably is that the rooting medium that you're using is contaminated. Why don't you get some clean, coarse builder's sand and try that? I noticed in your letter that you are allowing the cuttings to dry for 24 hours. That's a good idea before you insert them. Then mist the top of the cutting. Don't always wet that sand. Try to keep everything on a dry side. They'll do a little wilting, but they also will root for you. From Maryland, my neighbor and I both planted sweet potatoes this spring. My yield was wonderful, but his was mostly long, stringy roots. The plants look the same, and he even has nice, rich soil. Well, I think that's probably the trouble. His sweet potatoes growing in nice, rich soil, which I imagine was plenty moist, do make these long, stringy roots. Yours in a drier soil made those nice, chunky roots, the ones we're looking for. Pyracantha bushes, Pennsylvania. Pyracantha bushes have very few berries. When and how should they be pruned? I've been pruning them in March. Well, I think it's not the pruning. I think it's probably your plant has either shade or root competition from some other surrounding plants. I would try feeding them and get good strong growth, because the blossoms you get more blossoms and hence more fruit. From Connecticut, I have a banana plant. The leaves are turning yellow and brown. Can you help me? Well, that's very common for banana plant. They're not a very good house plant. They can be grown. And even in the tropics, if you've seen them, the leaves come out, look something like this bird of paradise foliage. When the wind gets at them, those leaves tatter and tear, and then they eventually turn brown. I would just simply take off the old blossoms and put the plant in a position where someone won't brush into it. That may be causing it to turn brown. Why doesn't my angel wing begonia blossom? This is from West Virginia. It's 4 feet tall. Well, I think your plant probably is not having good growing conditions. One, almost any potting soil, allow it to become nearly dry between waterings. Cut off the tips of the plant and make them branch. You should be getting blossoms 2 or 3 times a year. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Now, next week, on most of these PBS stations, we'll continue Crockett's Victory Garden. And next week, I'm going to show you, for example, how to make a very simple leaf composter and use up some of those leaves that are on your yard and you don't know what to do with. We're going to sow some tiny seeds of the streptocarpus. Sounds like a disease, but it's a handsome plant. And then I'm going to show you how to store those gladiolus bulbs we dug a month ago. Now, to those good friends who won't be seeing our winter series, I'll see you right back here again next April. I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden.